Hi, this is Mary Hood again. This is the second time I'm trying to do this video. My first time, my laptop crashed right in the middle of it, so hopefully this will work a little better. This is the topic I'm most asked for and the one I least like to do. The topic is basically, what's a typical day look like when you're homeschooling? And the answer unequivocally is there is no typical day. All right, that's why I don't like to do it. There are so many variables, things like, how many children do you have? How far apart are they spaced? Do you live in the city nearby a lot of outside classes or sports activities, or are you very rural in the country? Do you have kids that are approaching 16, 17, 18, or are we dealing with toddlers? There's just so many variables that it's absolutely impossible to talk about a typical day. But what I will do is tell you a little bit about what my day tended to look like most days when I was homeschooling kids that were up to about age 12. And then I'm going to give you some guidelines for thinking about what your teenagers are doing. Because again, it gets even less typical then. Just remember, even when I talk about my typical day when my kids were little, it didn't always look like that. One day it might be beautiful outside, and we might decide to go to the zoo and spend the whole day there. Another day, maybe I'm sick, and I can't do anything, and they wind up plunked in front of the best TV show I can find. My husband used to laugh when I would talk about pajama days, days when we stayed in our pajamas and ate popcorn all day long. But once in a while you have a day like that. And so the beauty of homeschooling is that you can look at things from a long-term perspective and not get, sucked into, my day has to look exactly like this. Especially if you buy it all into the idea of relaxed homeschooling, which of course I've talked about in many other videos here, so I won't get into that right now. So at any rate, when my kids were little, typically we always had breakfast together. There aren't very many things I could say we always did, but we always did that. My husband would be gone by that time. He worked and left early in the morning, but by the time we sat down together, we were always there, all of us at breakfast. There was no like, I'm going to grab a bite, and no. We always were right there at breakfast. Now, prior to breakfast, I typically would have a half hour, 45 minutes. I often had a baby or a small toddler, and then some of the kids were older. And so I always took at least a half an hour, 45 minutes to sort of ease into my own day, often nursing a baby, maybe getting a chance to do a few little flexibility exercises for myself, maybe a little bit of Bible study or quiet time for myself. But the one thing I really tried to learn to train my children from an early age, that before breakfast they were on their own, that they needed, if there was an emergency, of course, they could come get me. But other than emergency, they were expected to be on their own. If nothing else, they could play quietly in their own rooms, maybe look at some books or do some puzzles or whatever, or play with their Legos, or depending again on how old they were and what they were capable of. As they got a little older, some of them would use that time to begin their own day, to do some of their own, cleaning themselves up or doing whatever. And sometimes a couple of them that were a little more motivated to get done with things early in the day might actually do that time to get a little head start on some independent academic work that maybe they knew they were going to be expected to do later in the day. But whatever it was, that was mom's time. It was mom's time. Like I said, I was often with a baby or a toddler. Don't misunderstand me. I wasn't trying to get off by myself away from a baby or away from, say, a 2-year-old. That at that point, to me, that person is almost like a little appendage of mine. And I learned to have my own quiet time and nurse them, and and maybe play quietly with them, do whatever I'm going to do. But I didn't just jump out of bed and go make breakfast. I can tell you that. It always took me a little while to get there. Now, once I was there, though, I always say that if I ever looked like a school, it might have been at the breakfast table, because I kind of figured I had them all there anyway. They were bright and fresh in the morning and maybe ready to do a little something together at the breakfast table. I often did Bible studies at the breakfast table. This, of course, would be after we finished eating and we pushed the stuff off to the side and do whatever. I often had a Bible story, and when my kids were quite young, I often used Pearl Buck's The Story Bible. That comes in a Volume 1, Volume 2 paperback set, which you can sometimes find. It's out of print now. They also sell a big hardback of the entire thing, but if you can get that at all, it's going to be $100 because it's kind of popular, and it's considered, classic, I guess, at this point. I liked that book for a couple of reasons, and one was that it didn't have pictures, and I wanted them to use their own imagination and draw their own pictures. She also, being a novelist, had a way of making the end of a chapter seem exciting and make you want to read the next chapter the next day. And of course, as a Christian, it was important to me that she stuck extremely closely to the actual Bible, which she did. My only problem with that set is that it doesn't really go past the Gospels. I wish that she had gotten into some of Paul's work and so forth, and she didn't really do that. Anyway, I would read that to them, and then I would give them some 11 by 17 paper, 11 by 17 inch paper that had primary lines at the bottom and a place for a picture at the top. Take several of them, staple them over together to make a little book, and then when I would read the story to them, they would do whatever they felt led to do. When they're very little, it might just be illustrating it, and they might be doing that while I'm reading the story to them. That's okay with me. I don't care about that. And then, they get a little older, maybe they have a caption, Noah's Ark, and then a little older, maybe they write a paragraph about it or something. So at any rate, that was kind of a staple. Then I often had one other thing going on. I guess you've heard me talk sometimes about relaxed unit studies. This tended to be along those lines. I do remember one time for quite a while we were doing some work using the whiteboard quite a bit. I always had a whiteboard in the kitchen. I tried not to make it look too much like a schoolroom, but the whiteboard to me was a staple. It's something I really needed to have in there. I remember at any rate once doing some work on Greek mythology and Greek history and things like that, and I remember that sort of morphed into tall tales of the American, like things like Paul Bunyan and Pecos Bill, Tom Henry, Paul. This is his name, John Henry, and things like that. At other times, sometimes we'd be doing a little foreign language work at the breakfast table. I believed in exposing them to the sounds of several foreign languages and the ideas of them, but not necessarily trying to get fluent at that age. That was just my own take on it. Luckily, I am extremely good at pronouncing other languages. If you're not, you need to be a little cautious with it. You don't want to give them wrong sounds. But I often did a little bit of foreign language work at the table. Now after that, and by this time it probably would be at least 9 o'clock in the morning. The rest of the morning, again, I've been influenced quite a bit by Charlotte Mason, who really talked about the morning being the productive time and the afternoon being for playtime. For me, I didn't do it exactly the same way, but generally I considered the morning to be productive time. And it would be a very flexible kind of thing. Again, depending on their ages and what we were going into, that's when I tried to get a little bit of the basics of academics in. I remember often I would say to one older child, maybe somebody who's 12 or so, would you watch this toddler while I work with your sister over here on her math for a little bit? And then once in a while we would come together and have reading time, which was usually completely together, everybody together, and I would sit there and read books to them. And then there might be a quiet time for quiet reading off in your room, and one of them might go off and do that, and one of them might go off and do some kind of a project, or two of them might do something. But the point is, it was always sort of productive time, do something productive. I even do this now. I have like a productive time when I'm all by myself. By the way, that's my husband's in Colorado right now. I have nobody here but 2 dogs, and I'm still adhering to my normal schedule, which is do something productive and then rest. And those rests, no matter what your age, have to be built into the day. It can't be something you take time for if you can. No, you've got to have rest, relaxations. It may not be laying down, sleeping, but it needs to be a break and some rest and so forth. But we did that sort of thing basically until lunch. Typically we'd have lunch somewhere around noon or 1 o'clock. And then the afternoon typically was a little looser. It's time for running errands, a time for going to dance lessons or baseball practice, going to the park, doing whatever again. Some individual, some group activities, some all the family and so forth. But you notice that up to this age, I haven't mentioned a lot about outside academic classes, which some people are puzzled about because I do run a resource center which sometimes has some classes for younger children. But that's because I'm driven by demand sometimes. When my kids were little, we didn't do a lot of that. We pretty much were together as a family, but again, and doing things together. We tried to live an interesting life. And again, I tried to have at least a rest period all the way up to 10 or 11, 12 years of age. And again, for an older kid, that's more likely to be in their own room, either finishing up some little bit of academic work themselves or reading for pleasure or putting together a puzzle or doing some kind of project or whatever. And as they got older, it didn't always have to be in their own room. It might be downstairs in the workshop or out in the yard or something like that. But again, it was mostly academics in the morning, mostly fun things, and individual pursuits and family errands. That's when we go grocery shopping and so forth in the afternoon. I also tended to use Fridays as a kind of a shake it up, do something different day, depending again on the weather. We did a lot of things like going as a family to a museum or to a zoo or something like that. And I often would buy one, we were never wealthy back then, but I would try to buy one museum membership a year, basically, so that we could go back over and over and milk that membership for all it was worth. And we tried to have a zoo membership as often as we could because I just think the zoo is a wonderful place for all kinds of learning. So at any rate, that's kind of what things looked like when my kids were little. Now, as kids get a little older, there's a lot of issues. And the things you have to think through again for your own family, beginning with the idea, when I talk about the middle school shift and I talk about 13 and up or so, it's really important to me to recognize that these are young adults now. They're not really children anymore. And that means you really have to pay a lot of attention. Not that you always do what they want to do, but you have to pay a lot of attention to their expressed desires. I don't want to do that curriculum. I'd rather do my science in this manner. I'd like to go to this outside class. I don't want to take piano lessons this year. Whatever it is, you really need to listen to them a lot and give them a lot of respect. Now, I used to talk to my kids at that age and I'm down too low. Put one arm out here for privileges and one for responsibilities and do like a seesaw motion. And I'd say the more responsibilities you take, the more responsible you are for maintaining your own schedule, setting your own goals, choosing your own materials and so forth, then the more privileges you get. And that to me was key because I definitely believe in sheltering children when they're little, but I also strongly believe in gradually getting them out of the nest during the teenage years and not trying to hang on too tight to my own control and not trying too much to be a teacher with them as they get older. I find that if I'm a mother and I do a lot of praying for them, it works a lot better than me trying to maintain too much control over everything as they get into the teenage years. Now, there are some other things to consider too, and one very important one to me is balance. Most people think about balance when they think about young children. They think, okay, we work hard and then we play and then we rest and all this. But I work with a lot of teenagers, and I bet that 80% of them at least there's too much stuff in their lives. There are too many things. They're actually little miniature burned out adults. They're being expected to do too many things, too much academics. Every single thing that a parent wants to accomplish can afford, this outside class, that outside class, this sports team. All of these things, they're too much for these teenagers. They would be too much for you as an adult. You know what it's like to be burnt out. So I think you really have to remember that teenagers need balance. And where children need playtime, teenagers just need downtime. And that may look different for one to another. One might just really need to read. My daughter, Jenny, she just read a lot when she was a teenager. There are other kids who need time to do their music, to practice piano or practice the drum set or go out and forage in the woods, and build things and all that sort of thing. But just remember, the teenagers, they have needs, and they can't just be sitting there for academics hour after hour after hour, many of it these days, of course, on the computer, and then be expected to maybe have a part-time job in addition to that, maybe, go, help out with the babysitting or something else around the house, do this, do that, outside classes, now we're going to dual enroll and all that sort of thing. Just be careful. they need balance. There's that old book that used to be very popular called The Hurried Child. Well, I'd like to write one called The Hurried Teenager, because I just think that that's an epidemic these days, that the kids are just being expected to do too many things. And of course, some of it is coming from them. That's very true also. All right. Now, if you're going to do something like dual enrolling, especially get older, I personally think that's an excellent thing to do, but I highly recommend you do it one class at a time. The point of this is to ease into college, not to finish a whole year early, to me. And again, you may have different thoughts on this. But to me, it's the idea of easing in and learning a little bit of something, learning how to deal with a teacher or something, but not doing so much that they actually get burned out on it and start doing poorly. So to me, when only one of my sons did this, it kind of wasn't as big a thing back then as it is now. But my youngest son did dual enroll for a while, and he took one class at a time. He took the first English class, and then the second English class, and then the first algebra class, I believe. And then after that, he went off to another college and transferred in as a freshman. And so I'm not a big fan of a heavy load of dual enrollment. If they really want to do one or two classes, 3 tops, I would never do more than that. And similarly, I have a lot of these resource centers set up sometimes where teenagers are coming in and doing their work. And, like a biology class or an algebra class or what have you. And again, I highly recommend that people not do all of it like that. Save something for them to be genuinely at home on their own homeschooling. All right. For example, English. I really recommend kids do most of their English at home. Although I'm teaching right now a Zoom class on fiction writing. So again, there's a point for learning from somebody else. But really, English is reading, and a lot of kids just do better just reading on their own. For me, I always if they were going to have some kind of a science lab, that was somebody else was going to do it for them. I'm not a science lab person at the high school level. So I usually had them do that on their own. If I wasn't good at math, I might farm that out. If I wanted them to learn a foreign language that I don't know, I might try to find a class for that. But again, remember, when you're talking teenagers, so much of this should be they should at least have a say in it, And if they're begging you to do something, then pay some attention to that, Don't, say, well, there's no money in the budget to have flute lessons this year because you got to take that biology class. Well, maybe you should drop the biology class and let them take the flute instead. All right. So now, like I said before, I believe strongly in developing responsibility among teenagers and gradually helping them to learn how to set up their own goals and deal with things. And one of the things I believe strongly about developing responsibility is when they demonstrate that responsibility, then I think it's really important to get them out there and get driving lessons and get a car that they pay for, or something. I'm just not a fan of just giving kids everything, But they need to have that. They need to have a part-time job when they get to the point when they are needing something like a car. Now, part-time jobs for teenagers don't pay very well. Some of you may want to look into alternative things. Some homeschoolers do some entrepreneur-type programs. If you're interested in that, look into my friend Ray Perry, R-H-E-A Perry, P-E-R-R-Y, and her business, Educating for Success. She works with a lot of teenagers and adults who want to have their own businesses. And there's a book I just recently read called The 10 Top Distinctions Between the Millionaires and the Middle Class. And one of them, of course, is working for profit rather than wages. And a teenage wage is so small. There is a time to have that teenager out there working at a Chick-fil-A or a Pizza Hut or someplace like that. It develops work responsibilities, but it's not going to add that much money. If this is somebody who has large money needs, somebody who, like one of my daughters was an artist, and that's a lot of money, out on materials and classes, and ultimately art school and all that sort of thing. The more they have needs for money, the more they better be figuring out a way to help out with that. Because, even if I was rich beyond my wildest dreams, I wouldn't just hand everything to my kids. I don't think that's good for them. Now, along with this idea of privilege and responsibility, when my kids were young, there was a certain time we got up, and I said before, typically by 9, we'd be done with breakfast and on to other things. But as my kids became older, I allowed them to some extent to set their own schedules. You know, some teenagers just really rather work late into the evening and then get up a little bit later. But they had to actually be being responsible in order to do that. So if one of my kids was up at night doing a writing assignment or something, or finishing their math, heaven knows I couldn't do algebra at 10 o'clock at night, but a couple of my kids, that's when they seem to shine. So if they're doing something like that and then they want to sleep in a little in the morning, that's fine. But if they're up at night playing computer games and watching television shows and stuff like that, that's a different story. You know, they have to get their work done sometime. And of course, most of the world operates on the idea that you get up early and you get to work and so forth. So unless they're showing that they have the responsibility level to maintain a different type of schedule, they'll still stay on mine. And all of these things, as you're thinking about them, for little kids, for your teenagers, especially when you have a mixed group where you have young children and older kids and everything, just remember that not only each of them has to be in balance, but you have to be in balance. The family has to be in balance. And so many times when children are doing a lot of outside classes, running around, dance lessons, you know, play practice, athletics and all that sort of thing, it's the mom that's driving them around all over the place, often with the 2-year-old in the back seat. You have to stay in balance too, you know. And if there are situations where you can't tolerate a 17-year-old staying up until 1 o'clock and staying and not getting up until 10, well, it's still your house, you know. And that's why I say I want you to consider all of these things, but the ultimate decisions about how your house is going to operate and what your schedules are going to look like has to be your own. Now, when you're talking about high school, remember I've done a couple other videos. They can be found not on YouTube, but on my Facebook group, which is called Relaxed Homeschooling with Mary Hood. The YouTube channel, of course, is just youtube.com/Relaxed Homeschooler. And I'll put this particular video up on both of them. But on the Facebook group, I have some longer ones. And about in the middle of the videos that I've done, there's a part 1, 2, and 3 on high school that talks a lot about these things, including how to do a transcript and so forth, in a lot more depth. If you're looking for the videos on that Facebook group, I think now with the new Facebook, you have to click on media and then on videos, and then the little thumbnails, you know, pictures of myself will pop up. And if you click on one of those, off to the side in the comments, it will tell you what the topic is, right? Because I have topics there from little children, you know, all the way on up to high school and everything. If you're interested in this, please subscribe to the video, the YouTube channel. There's a little tiny subscribe. I'm not one of these flamboyant types with the big subscribe button, but down at the bottom you'll see a little tiny red arrow that's a subscribe button. Please subscribe there and join our group, the Facebook group, again, Relaxed Homeschooling with Mary Hood. And if you ask to join, you'll be asked to answer 1 or 2 quick questions. And if you just state that you are in fact a homeschooling mom, that's really about all you have to answer. And if you're not, then you'll just have to tell me why you want to join. So at any rate, I hope to see you there. I hope this little Facebook thing was good for you, Facebook/YouTube, and I hope it really worked this time. I'm so tired of technical issues. Thanks a lot. See you later.